Sometimes the person who saves your life is the same person fate plans to break your heart with, Ethan Brooks would later say, though on that rainy October evening he had no idea how true those words would become. The storm had rolled over the city just before sunset, turning the streets silver beneath the glow of traffic lights and storefront signs. Ethan had finished a long shift at a small bakery near the harbor and was walking toward the bus stop with a paper cup of coffee warming his hands. Life had never been easy for him. As an Omega who had spent most of his 24 years taking care of himself, he had learned not to expect kindness from strangers. He rented a tiny apartment, worked 2 jobs, and tried not to think too much about the future. Yet despite everything, he still believed that helping people mattered. That belief was the reason he noticed the elegant older woman standing alone beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. Most people hurried past her without a second glance. Ethan almost did the same. Then he saw the concern in her eyes as she looked across the street. Several vehicles had suddenly stopped in unusual positions, creating confusion among drivers and pedestrians alike. Something felt wrong. Ethan could not explain it, but instinct told him the woman might need help. He stepped closer and offered a polite smile. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman looked at him with surprise. Even in the rain and fading light, she carried herself with quiet confidence. "I am fine," she answered softly. "Just waiting for someone." Ethan nodded, prepared to continue on his way, when the atmosphere around them changed. Conversations nearby faded. Drivers began honking. People turned their heads toward the intersection. The woman's expression shifted from calm to concern. Ethan followed her gaze and saw several individuals moving quickly through the crowd. He did not understand what was happening, only that the woman suddenly looked vulnerable despite her composed appearance. Without thinking, he moved closer to her side. "Maybe we should get somewhere safer," he said. Before she could answer, a black luxury SUV appeared at the curb. The rear door opened. A tall Alpha stepped out. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. His dark coat was soaked by rain, but he seemed not to notice. His sharp features and focused eyes made him look more like a force of nature than a man. The moment he saw the woman, relief flashed across his face. "Mother," he called. The woman smiled. "Damien." Ethan stepped back immediately, realizing he had interrupted a family reunion. He expected the Alpha to ignore him completely. Instead, Damien Walker paused and studied him for a second. Their eyes met briefly. Ethan felt strangely unsettled. There was something familiar about the Alpha, though he was certain they had never met. Before either could speak, the tension in the street intensified. People began moving away from the area. Damien's attention sharpened instantly as if he sensed danger before anyone else. Several men emerged from different directions, forcing Damien's security team into action. Confusion spread through the crowd. Ethan did not fully understand the situation, but he could see one thing clearly. The older woman standing beside him was frightened for the first time since he had met her. And for reasons he could not explain, Ethan's first thought was not about protecting himself. It was about protecting her. As rain poured from the darkening sky, Ethan took a single step forward, placing himself between Victoria Walker and the uncertainty rushing toward them. In that moment, neither of them knew that one choice would connect their lives forever, setting in motion a story that had actually begun more than 10 years earlier. When Ethan opened his eyes again, the first thing he noticed was silence. Not the silence of his small apartment after midnight or the silence of an empty city street before dawn, but the deep, expensive quiet of a place where every detail had been designed to create comfort. Sunlight filtered through tall windows covered by cream-colored curtains. The mattress beneath him felt softer than anything he had ever slept on. For several seconds he wondered if he was dreaming. Then he noticed the faint ache throughout his body and remembered the rain, the crowded street, and the elegant woman he had tried to help. His heart began to race. He pushed himself upright and immediately regretted it as dizziness washed over him. A calm voice spoke from across the room. You should not do that yet. Ethan turned his head and froze. Damien Walker was sitting in a leather chair near the window with a tablet resting on one knee. The Alpha looked exactly as intimidating as he had on the street, perhaps even more so in daylight. His dark hair was perfectly neat, and his expression revealed nothing. Ethan suddenly became aware that he was wearing unfamiliar clothes and lying in a room that probably cost more per night than he earned in a month. Where am I? Ethan asked. At my family estate, Damien replied. You have been resting for 3 days. Ethan blinked. 3 days? Damien nodded. The doctors wanted to keep you under observation. Ethan stared at him, struggling to process everything. I cannot afford doctors like that. For the first time, something close to amusement touched Damien's face. That will not be your concern. Ethan immediately frowned. I do not accept charity. The Alpha studied him for several seconds before setting aside the tablet. Good. I do not offer charity. The answer confused Ethan even more. Before he could respond, the door opened and Victoria Walker entered carrying a small tray. The elegant woman from the street looked remarkably different now. Gone was the uncertainty he had seen that evening. She moved with confidence and warmth. The moment she saw Ethan awake, her eyes brightened. There you are, she said. You frightened us. Ethan looked between mother and son. I am sorry. Victoria set the tray beside the bed and gently shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. Ethan lowered his eyes awkwardly. No one had looked at him with that kind of concern in a very long time. Most people saw an Omega working multiple jobs and assumed he needed saving. Victoria looked at him as if he had done something meaningful. Over the next few days, Ethan slowly regained his strength. He expected Damien to disappear after making sure he was recovering, but the Alpha continued appearing unexpectedly. Sometimes he brought coffee from a local shop. Other times he delivered updates about Ethan's apartment, assuring him that his rent had been paid and his belongings secured. Every time Ethan tried to protest, Damien simply informed him that practical problems were easier to solve than stubborn arguments. Their conversations remained brief at first. Yet Ethan began noticing things others might miss. Damien checked on his recovery schedule personally. He remembered details Ethan mentioned in passing. He quietly instructed the kitchen staff to prepare foods Ethan actually liked. None of those actions matched the cold reputation Ethan had heard whispered by people throughout the city. One afternoon, while they sat on a terrace overlooking the ocean, Victoria watched them from a distance with a thoughtful smile. Ethan followed her gaze and laughed softly. Your mother keeps looking at me like she is trying to solve a puzzle. Damien stared toward the water. She likes you. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. She barely knows me. Damien was silent for a moment. Then he said something that caught Ethan completely off guard. Neither do I. But I would like to change that. For reasons he could not explain, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Somewhere deep inside, a strange sense of familiarity stirred again. The feeling made no sense. Yet every day he spent near Damien Walker, it grew stronger. Ethan had planned to leave the Walker estate the moment his doctor cleared him, but life had a strange way of changing direction when he least expected it. A week after waking up, he was strong enough to walk comfortably through the sprawling property. The estate sat on a stretch of coastline overlooking the Atlantic, with winding stone paths, gardens filled with white roses, and large windows that captured every sunset. It felt less like a home and more like a world separated from ordinary life. Yet what surprised Ethan most was not the luxury. It was how quickly Victoria Walker made him feel welcome. Every morning she invited him to breakfast. Every afternoon she found some excuse to spend time with him, whether it was discussing books, sharing stories about travel, or teaching him family recipes that had been passed down for generations. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in years. One afternoon, while helping Victoria arrange flowers in a sunlit conservatory, she suddenly smiled and asked, "Has anyone ever told you that you carry sadness like it is your responsibility?" Ethan froze. Few people ever looked closely enough to notice. He lowered his eyes and shrugged. "I suppose everyone carries something." Victoria reached over and adjusted a white rose in the arrangement. "Perhaps. But not everyone carries it alone." The simple words lingered with him long after the conversation ended. That evening, Ethan found himself sitting on a balcony overlooking the ocean. Damien joined him without warning, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one over and sat beside him. For a while neither spoke. The waves crashed against distant rocks below, filling the silence. Finally Damien asked, "What are you thinking about?" Ethan stared at the horizon. "Your mother." Damien raised an eyebrow. "That is not the answer I expected." Ethan laughed softly. "She treats me like family." The Alpha looked toward the water. "That is because she sees you as family." Ethan immediately shook his head. "That does not make sense." "It makes perfect sense." Damien's voice remained calm. "You protected someone important to her. More importantly, you were kind when you had no reason to be." Ethan looked down at his coffee cup. No one had ever praised him for kindness before. Most people treated kindness as weakness. Yet Damien sounded as though it was something valuable. As the days passed, Ethan began noticing changes within himself. He stopped checking apartment listings because he no longer rushed to leave. He stopped feeling nervous when entering rooms occupied by the Walker family staff because everyone greeted him warmly. Most surprisingly, he started looking forward to Damien's presence. Whether they were sharing breakfast, walking along the shoreline, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence, Ethan found himself feeling safe. It was a feeling he barely remembered from childhood. One evening, Victoria watched them from a distance while they played a casual game of chess in the library. Her expression softened with something that looked almost emotional. Ethan noticed but said nothing. Across the board, Damien quietly moved a piece and studied him. "You know," the Alpha said, "this is the most relaxed I have ever seen my mother." Ethan smiled. "Maybe she is finally happy." Damien held his gaze a second longer than usual. "Maybe we all are." Neither of them realized that hidden inside the estate was a forgotten piece of the past waiting to be discovered, a secret that would soon connect their lives in ways neither could imagine. The following week passed with a peaceful rhythm Ethan had never experienced before. For the first time in years, he was not rushing between jobs, worrying about rent, or calculating whether he could afford groceries until the next paycheck. Instead, he spent his mornings walking along the cliffs overlooking the ocean and his afternoons helping Victoria in the gardens or reading in the estate library. Yet the greatest change was Damien. What had started as brief conversations gradually became something neither of them seemed eager to end. They shared meals together more often. They debated books, argued playfully about movies, and exchanged stories about their lives. Ethan learned that beneath Damien's intimidating reputation was a man carrying responsibilities that never truly left his shoulders. Damien learned that beneath Ethan's easy smile was someone who had spent most of his life expecting disappointment. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves trapped inside the library while a storm rolled across the coastline. Thunder echoed in the distance as rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Ethan sat on a ladder organizing books while Damien reviewed documents at a nearby table. "You know," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "before I came here, I thought people like you only existed in movies." Damien looked up. "People like me?" Ethan gestured vaguely around the room. "Powerful. Wealthy. Untouchable." Damien leaned back in his chair. "And now?" Ethan smiled. "Now I think you leave coffee cups everywhere and forget where you put your reading glasses." For a second Damien simply stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. The sound was warm and genuine. Ethan froze. It was the first time he had heard it. Something strange happened inside his chest. He quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the books. Later that evening, Victoria found Damien standing alone on a balcony overlooking the sea. She joined him quietly. "You care about him," she said. Damien did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "He is important to me." Victoria smiled sadly. "More important than you realize." Damien finally looked at her. "What does that mean?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Victoria's face. "Nothing," she replied. "Only that some people enter our lives for a reason." Damien studied her carefully. Lately, he had noticed moments like this. Moments when his mother looked at Ethan with an expression he could not quite understand. It was not guilt exactly. Nor was it fear. It felt more like someone guarding a fragile secret. The feeling lingered with Damien long after the conversation ended. A few days later, Ethan wandered into a rarely used wing of the estate while searching for a quiet place to read. The hallway was lined with old family photographs, paintings, and display cabinets filled with memorabilia collected over decades. He moved slowly, admiring the history preserved within the walls. Then his attention settled on a framed photograph sitting alone on a shelf. Ethan stopped walking. The picture showed a young boy standing beside Victoria near a lake. The child could not have been older than 12. His dark hair was shorter, and his features were softer, but there was no mistaking who it was. It was Damien. A strange sensation washed over Ethan. His pulse quickened unexpectedly. He stared at the photograph as fragments of something distant flickered through his mind. Sunlight reflecting on water. A frightened voice calling for help. A small hand reaching out. The images disappeared almost instantly, leaving only confusion behind. Ethan pressed a hand against the shelf, trying to steady himself. He had never visited this estate before. He had never met the Walker family. So why did that photograph feel familiar? And why did looking at a younger Damien make it seem as though he had forgotten something important years ago? For the next several days, Ethan could not stop thinking about the photograph. He returned to the hallway twice, pretending to admire the artwork while secretly studying the image of young Damien beside the lake. Each time, the same strange feeling returned. It was never a complete memory. It was more like standing outside a locked room and hearing faint voices through the door. The harder he tried to remember, the more frustrated he became. One afternoon, while helping Victoria organize old books in a storage room connected to the library, Ethan discovered a dusty cardboard box tucked behind a cabinet. "Do you want me to move this?" he asked. Victoria glanced over and immediately froze for a fraction of a second. The reaction was so brief that most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. "No," she said quickly. Then she softened her tone. "Those are just old family records." Ethan nodded, but curiosity had already taken root. Later that evening, he found himself replaying her expression. It was the same look she sometimes wore when watching him and Damien together. A look that seemed to contain both affection and concern. Meanwhile, Damien appeared increasingly distracted. During dinner, he would occasionally catch his mother staring at Ethan with that same unreadable expression. Whenever Damien asked if something was wrong, Victoria always changed the subject. The situation became impossible to ignore during a family gathering held at the estate. Several close friends of the Walker family arrived for an elegant weekend dinner. Ethan expected to stay out of the way, but Victoria insisted he join them. To his surprise, she introduced him not as a guest, but as someone special to the family. The words left Ethan speechless. Throughout the evening, he noticed how naturally he fit into conversations with Victoria and Damien. For the first time in his life, he felt included rather than tolerated. Yet beneath that happiness, something continued pulling at the edge of his mind. The answer finally arrived the following morning. Ethan was searching for a novel in the library when he noticed a small leather album sitting on a side table. It appeared recently moved, as though someone had been looking through it. He opened it without thinking. The first few pages contained family photographs spanning many years. Then he turned to a page that stopped him cold. There was another picture of Damien as a child. This one had been taken near a lake surrounded by pine trees. The moment Ethan saw it, his vision blurred. A sharp ache pulsed through his head. Suddenly, fragments burst into his mind with startling clarity. Warm summer sunlight. The smell of pine trees. Water sparkling beneath a blue sky. A frightened young boy standing dangerously close to a broken wooden dock. Ethan gasped and grabbed the edge of the table. The images came faster now. He remembered running. He remembered shouting. He remembered reaching for someone. The memory vanished before he could see what happened next, leaving him breathless. At that exact moment, Victoria entered the room. She saw the photograph in his hands and immediately turned pale. Neither spoke. For several long seconds, silence filled the library. Then Ethan looked up. "Why does this place feel familiar?" he asked quietly. Victoria closed her eyes. The question seemed to strike her harder than he expected. When she opened them again, emotion shimmered beneath the surface. "Ethan," she said softly, "there are some truths that have a way of finding us when we are finally ready to hear them." Ethan stared at her, his pulse racing. For the first time, he was absolutely certain of one thing. The strange connection he felt toward Damien was not imagination. Somewhere in the past, their lives had crossed long before that rainy evening in the city. And whatever had happened all those years ago was a secret Victoria Walker had been carrying alone for a very long time. Victoria remained silent for so long that Ethan wondered if she would answer at all. The library suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Finally, she walked to the nearby window and looked out toward the ocean. "I always hoped this day would never come," she said quietly. Ethan tightened his grip on the photograph. "What day?" Victoria turned back toward him. There was sadness in her eyes now, the kind carried by someone who had spent years protecting a secret. "The day you remembered." Ethan felt his heart begin to pound. "Remembered what?" Victoria crossed the room and gently took the album from his hands. She opened it to another page hidden farther back. Inside was a newspaper clipping preserved beneath clear plastic. The article was more than a decade old. Most of the text had faded, but one image remained clear. A young boy stood beside emergency responders near a lakeside park. Ethan stared at the photograph. The boy was Damien. Suddenly another fragment returned. He remembered a summer afternoon. He remembered being younger, no more than 14 years old. He remembered hearing someone call for help near the water. His breathing became uneven. "I know that place," Ethan whispered. Victoria nodded slowly. "Yes. You do." More memories surfaced. A broken section of dock. A frightened child. The feeling of running without thinking. The determination to help someone in danger. Ethan pressed a hand against his forehead. Damien was there. "Yes. And I was there too." Victoria's eyes filled with emotion. "You saved him." The words seemed impossible. Ethan stared at her. "What? You saved my son?" Tears shimmered in her eyes now. Damien was 12 years old. There was an accident near the lake. Everyone panicked. Before anyone else could react, a young Omega ran toward him. "That Omega was you." Ethan could barely breathe. The memories continued returning in scattered pieces. He remembered cold water. He remembered fear. He remembered relief when the younger Damien was finally safe. "But I do not understand," Ethan said. "Why do I not remember any of this?" Victoria lowered her gaze. Because after that day, your family moved away. Years passed. Life changed. And eventually the memory faded. Ethan sat down slowly. His entire world seemed to be shifting beneath his feet. Every strange feeling he had experienced since arriving at the estate suddenly made sense. The familiarity. The connection. The sense that he had seen Damien somewhere before. It had all been real. Does Damien know? Ethan finally asked. Victoria hesitated. That hesitation immediately unsettled him. No, she admitted. He does not. Ethan frowned. Why not? Victoria looked away. Because I never told him. Silence filled the room. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. You kept this from him? Victoria nodded. For years. Why? Her answer came almost as a whisper. Because I was afraid. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. Victoria closed her eyes. I was afraid that if Damien ever learned the truth, he would feel indebted to you forever. I wanted any future connection between you to be genuine. I wanted him to choose you because of who you are, not because of what you did. Ethan looked down at the photograph again. The revelation should have made him happy. Instead, a strange ache settled in his chest. For the first time, he realized that the truth he had spent weeks searching for was only the beginning. The real question was what would happen when Damien finally learned that the person standing beside him today was the same person who had once changed his life forever. Ethan left the library feeling as though the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. Every memory, every conversation, every moment he had shared with Damien suddenly carried a different meaning. The connection he had felt from the beginning was real. The familiarity had been real. Yet the truth had been hidden from him the entire time. For the rest of the day, he avoided everyone. He walked alone along the cliffs overlooking the ocean, replaying Victoria's confession again and again. What troubled him most was not the secret itself. It was the realization that Victoria had recognized him from the very beginning. She had known exactly who he was while welcoming him into her home. She had watched him grow closer to Damien while carrying a truth neither of them understood. By evening, a cold emptiness had settled inside his chest. When he finally returned to the estate, Damien was waiting on the terrace. The Alpha immediately noticed something was wrong. You disappeared all day, Damien said. I was starting to worry. Ethan forced a smile that never reached his eyes. I just needed some air. Damien stepped closer. That is not the real reason. Ethan looked away. Normally, Damien's concern would have comforted him. Tonight it only made everything hurt more. What would you do, Ethan asked quietly, if you discovered that someone important had hidden a life-changing truth from you? Damien frowned. That depends on the truth. And if everyone around you knew except you? The Alpha studied him carefully. Did something happen? Ethan wanted to tell him everything. He wanted to pull out the photograph, reveal the memories, and ask why fate had brought them together again after so many years. But Victoria's words echoed in his mind. She had hidden the truth because she wanted Damien's feelings to be genuine. Yet now Ethan could not stop wondering whether anything between them had ever been genuine at all. He suddenly imagined Damien discovering the truth and looking at him differently. Not as Ethan. Not as someone he cared about. But as the Omega who had once saved him. The thought broke something inside him. Forget it, Ethan said softly. It does not matter. Damien clearly did not believe him, but before he could ask another question, Ethan excused himself and walked away. That night he barely slept. Memories continued returning in fragments. The lake. The summer sun. The frightened boy. The relief he had felt after helping him. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. A few hours later, he found Victoria alone in the garden. She immediately knew why he had come. "You are angry with me," she said quietly. Ethan looked at the roses surrounding them. "I trusted you." Pain crossed her face. "I know. You let me spend weeks wondering why everything felt familiar. I was trying to protect both of you." Ethan shook his head. "You were deciding for us." Victoria lowered her gaze. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed older. Smaller somehow. "Perhaps I was," she admitted. "But every decision came from love." Ethan wanted to believe her. Part of him still did. Yet another part felt betrayed. The family he had begun to see as his own suddenly felt built upon a foundation he never agreed to. That afternoon, he packed a small bag. He did not leave immediately. He simply placed it beside the door of his room. The sight of it filled him with sadness. Deep down, he already knew what he needed to do. Before Damien learned the truth, before gratitude and obligation could complicate everything, Ethan had to leave. Because if Damien ever chose him, Ethan needed to know it was because of who he was now, not because of something that had happened 10 years ago. Ethan left before sunrise. The estate was still quiet, wrapped in the pale blue light of early morning. He carried only a single bag and a heart that felt far heavier than anything he could hold in his hands. He paused once at the front gate and looked back toward the mansion overlooking the ocean. For a brief moment, he almost turned around. He almost convinced himself to stay, explain everything, and trust that the truth would somehow lead to a happy ending. But the doubt inside him was stronger. If Damien discovered what had happened years ago, would he still look at Ethan the same way? Would every smile become gratitude? Would every kind gesture become obligation? Ethan could not bear the possibility. So he walked away. 3 hours later, Damien stood outside Ethan's empty room staring at the neatly made bed. The bag was gone. The closet was empty. The room looked as though its occupant had never existed. At first Damien assumed Ethan had gone into town. Then he noticed the envelope resting on the desk. His stomach tightened immediately. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Thank you for everything. Please do not look for me. I need time to understand some things on my own." Damien read the message 3 times. The words felt wrong. Ethan was many things, but he was not someone who disappeared without explanation. Something had happened. Within minutes, Damien was searching the estate. When that failed, he went directly to his mother. Victoria was sitting alone in the garden when he arrived. One look at her expression told him she already knew. "Where is Ethan?" Damien demanded. Victoria slowly set down her teacup. "He left." "Why?" Silence. Damien felt frustration rising. "Mother, what happened?" Victoria looked older than he had ever seen her. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she whispered, "The truth finally caught up with us." Damien frowned. "What truth?" Victoria closed her eyes and told him everything. She told him about the lake. She told him about the frightened boy he had once been. She told him about the young Omega who had helped him on a summer afternoon more than 10 years earlier. And finally, she told him the name of that Omega. Ethan Brooks. Damien stood completely still. It felt as though the world had stopped moving. Memories he had not revisited in years suddenly returned. The sunlight reflecting across the water. The panic. The relief afterward. A face he had never clearly remembered. "Ethan," he whispered. Victoria nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I recognized him the moment I saw him again." Damien struggled to process the revelation. Then another realization struck him. He knows. Yes. And he left because of this. Victoria lowered her head. "I believe so." Damien turned away, trying to make sense of the emotions crashing through him. Shock. Gratitude. anger, regret. But beneath all of them was something stronger. Fear. Not fear of the truth. Fear of losing Ethan. Suddenly every conversation, every shared meal, every walk along the cliffs felt precious. He remembered Ethan laughing in the library. Ethan teasing him about leaving coffee cups everywhere. Ethan standing beside his mother when no one else could. None of those memories had anything to do with the lake. None of them had anything to do with a debt from the past. They belonged entirely to the present. Damien finally looked back at Victoria. You were wrong. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I know. You should have trusted us. Victoria nodded silently. Damien took a slow breath. The pain in his chest became almost unbearable. For the first time, he understood what Ethan had meant to him. Not because of something that happened 10 years ago. Not because of gratitude. Not because of fate. Simply because Ethan was Ethan. And now he was gone. Damien looked toward the ocean beyond the estate grounds. Somewhere out there, Ethan was trying to carry this burden alone. Damien made a decision at that very moment. He would find him. Not to repay a debt. Not to honor an obligation. But because there was something he needed Ethan to hear directly from him before it was too late. 3 days later, Ethan sat alone on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the same lake that had unknowingly connected his life to Damien's years before. The small lakeside town was quiet in early autumn. Golden leaves drifted across the water while a cool breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the air. Ethan had come there searching for clarity, but instead he found himself replaying every moment he had spent at the Walker estate. The more he tried to convince himself that leaving had been the right decision, the less certain he became. He missed Victoria's kindness. He missed the sound of the ocean outside his window. Most of all, he missed Damien. A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. You always leave when something matters too much. Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned around. Damien stood several feet away. His coat was wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled, and there were shadows beneath his eyes that had not been there before. For a moment neither of them spoke. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he could hear it. How did you find me? He finally asked. Damien gave a tired smile. You told me once that this was the most peaceful place you've ever seen in a photograph. It seemed like a good place to start. Ethan looked away. You should not be here. I disagree. Damien walked closer until only a few feet separated them. You left without giving me a chance. Ethan swallowed hard. A chance for what? A chance to tell you the truth. Ethan laughed bitterly. I already know the truth. Damien shook his head. No. You know what happened 10 years ago. You do not know what I came here to say. Silence settled between them. Finally Ethan looked up. Then say it. Damien took a slow breath. When my mother told me everything, I was shocked. I was grateful. I was angry that she hid it from both of us. His voice softened. But none of those feelings were the reason I came after you. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Then why did you come? Damien held his gaze without hesitation. Because losing you was the first thing that truly scared me. Ethan looked away immediately. You think that now because you feel responsible. No, Damien's answer came instantly. That is exactly what you do not understand. He stepped closer. I did not spend weeks looking forward to breakfast because of a memory from childhood. I did not stay awake thinking about your smile because of a debt. I did not miss you because of gratitude. Ethan could not speak. Damien's voice remained calm but unwavering. I do not care that you saved me 10 years ago. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Damien smiled gently. I mean that in the best possible way. I am thankful. I always will be. But that is not why I am here. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent around them. Then Damien spoke the words Ethan needed to hear. I do not love the person who helped a frightened boy near a lake. His eyes never left Ethan's. I love the man who challenged me, argued with me, made my mother laugh again, and somehow became the most important person in my life. Ethan felt tears gathering despite his efforts to stop them. Months of uncertainty, fear, and heartbreak finally began to loosen their grip on his heart. You really mean that, he whispered. Damien nodded. Every word. A laugh escaped Ethan through his tears. For the first time since leaving the estate, he felt something he thought he had lost. Peace. Later that afternoon, they returned together. Victoria was waiting on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The moment she saw them, relief filled her eyes. No one needed to say much. Some wounds healed through explanations. Others healed through forgiveness. As the sun began setting over the water, Ethan realized that the truth had not broken his future after all. It had simply led him back to the people who had become his family. And this time, there would be no more secrets standing between them.